monster who hurt those kids is dead. That monster is dead. And we told you from the beginning. And it is one of the worst things that ever happened. And I told you, the first time I stood up here and talked to you, I told you that you were not going to be the same person when you come out of this. And nor should you be. Nor should any of us. Witnessing horror, the tragedy, the loss, it's immeasurable. It's immeasurable. It's unthinkable. That loss is unthinkable. Their loss, it's unthinkable for any of us. You know, I told you guys before, I have a 4-year-old, a 1-year-old. And, you know, we told you we're from San Antonio. And obviously, you know, I want to go back and see him on the weekends after the first week. I went back. The first thing I did was my 4-year-old came downstairs and I hugged him. I hugged him. And started crying. And his hair, you know, trying to, so he doesn't see it. He said, "Are you sad, Daddy?" I said, "No, I'm happy that I'm holding you." Because I know what a privilege, doing this case, I know what a privilege it is to hold that child. I do. Right? I know, I can just imagine what it's like to not be able to do that. And I can imagine the pain, and I can imagine the anger. I can imagine wanting to put somebody in that chair because I can't put the monster that did that to my child in that chair. I can imagine that. And I can imagine putting pressure. And I can imagine them responding to the pressure. And I can imagine them putting him in that chair. Him and only him. In that chair. To try to pay for the pain. To try to somehow this could cover the immeasurable and the immense loss. And so after I saw him on Friday, we have to come back here that Sunday after the first week. And Gary, he comes and picks me up. That's kind of what we've been doing. And my son comes out and he says, "Are you going to go help that man?" And that's what we told him was the reason I'm not there. And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to go help that man." Adrian Gonzales. Because he needs my help. He needs our help. Because they, the government, the power of the state, has decided that he has to pay for the failures of that day, for the mistakes that were made that day, and for all the pain that they feel. And it's not right. Because the person that they plucked out and put in that chair, that person showed, we showed throughout this trial, that person was acting. He was acting. He was trying. And what I hear from the prosecutor, what I hear from the state, and what you've heard this entire time, what you've heard is that they will massage all the facts, they'll twist them all into a pretzel. That every one of these officers is fine, he's not. They'll twist it. Well, look who acted. They acted. Well, Adrian acted. Well, he didn't act the right way. They acted. Well, they didn't act the right way. Well, yeah, but he didn't act the right way, and he didn't know exactly what was going on, and he remained. Well, yeah, but Adrian remained in the hallway. Adrian remained in the hallway after he got shot at. Well, yeah, he remained in danger at that point, but before that point he remained, and he didn't know what was going on. Every fact that they've tried to bring, they've twisted it around. I'm going to show you. You're going to watch. I'm going to show you what they've done to twist this thing from the beginning to the end. But ultimately, what we're talking about is we're talking about duty, we're talking about burden, and all of those things. And I don't want one thing that I'm saying right now to make you believe that he doesn't believe that he has a duty to stop something that he knows is going on. Of course he does. He knows that. He was trying to do it. He started trying to do his duty. You look at some of these other people, no. They're not trying to do their duty. They're trying to stay back. And one of the things that the prosecutor said, he said, what you do here will tell law enforcement, give them how they respond. I'll tell you what, I agree with that, but not in the way that he's saying it. Because the way he wants you to believe it is what your verdict says is that next time these officers will make the right choice, the right decision. They will respond appropriately. They will be perfect. But the problem is that the issues here are not that Adrian failed to respond. They're not that he was intending not to engage. So you're not going to fix any of that. Because I'll tell you, and I hope it never happens again. I think we all know that it probably will. But those officers, what your verdict says is not going to make them perfect the next time. It's not going to make them not make mistakes. It's not going to make them not interpret things differently, strangely, weirdly, based on their own experiences. That's not what it's going to do. But I'll tell you what it would do. If you convict them, they're all going to be Randy Hill on that perimeter. There's nobody going in. What do? You went in. And you convict them. What does it tell all the police officers? It's going to tell them, I'm not getting in that crap. I'm not getting in that chair. If I see somebody running towards the school, I'm not going after them, because if I'm mistaken and it takes me to the other side of the building from where the shooter is, and then I can't understand or know where the shooter is, I can go to prison. I can get prosecuted. So what you tell police officers is don't go in, don't react, don't respond, stay on the perimeter, because Randy Hill isn't sitting in that chair. He's not. Adrian Gonzales is here. Randy Hill is not. None of those officers are in that chair. That's what you're going to tell them. You're going to tell them don't do it. And you can't tell them that. It's like, I agree with them. You can't tell them that. We cannot have law enforcement feel that way. Feel like if they're not perfect, if they don't make a perfect decision, and that's where they go. And their family goes right there. There's nothing that's going to bring these kids back. There's nothing ever is going to solve that pain. Nothing, not that. Because one of the things that Bill said to you is, he said, those kids deserve to be remembered, and they do. That you do not honor their memory by doing an injustice in their name. You don't. That does not honor those children. By doing an injustice, by doing what they want you to do, by letting him massage the facts, by letting the pretzel go all the way around and miss everybody else, but keeps going right back to him, because that's what they need. We talk about the charge. If I can get it up. The duty. So remember this about what the court has read to you. And remember, I'm not saying he doesn't have a duty. Of course he does. But just like every officer, just like the officers in San Antonio, they all had the duty. But that's, and it may have sounded flippant when we compared it. We said, look, you're in San Antonio. You hear there's a school shooting, right? You didn't stop it. Well, no, because it's not happening in the presence. And the reason we're asking that question is because the law is specific about it. A person, they have a duty to prevent an offense against a person about to be committed in his presence. So the first thing you have to figure out is that in his presence? You know, and the judge told you, you know, use common meanings, but he is here, and he never, they're not even disputing, he never saw the shooter, ever. He is never in the presence of the shooter. Now what Bill may say is, well, he didn't go to the presence. But that's not what this law says. Law doesn't say you have to go and find yourself and make yourself be in the presence, and I'm not trying to make any excuse about that. But the law is the law is the law. This isn't about you have to go seek it out and make it happen in your presence. The law is saying if it's happening right there, there's a duty. Of course there is. He was doing his duty. He was running to the danger. He was driving right in there. If that was the gunman, and God, I wish it was, he would have ran him right over. That's what he was doing. He's going 50 miles an hour at that person. Now, what I'm glad is he didn't run the person over because he realized it's Melody Flores. He realized it's a coach is what he thought, teacher's aide. But he realized who it was after it's already too late, but he's here. And from this point, that shooter is never in his presence, ever. There's never a time. The only time that he gets close is when he goes, one of the first 5 people to go up that hallway. That is a hallway of death. Anyone going into that hallway knows, anyone knows, any police officer knows, that those rifle rounds start coming that way as they're coming up the hallway, it's death. They don't have any equipment. They don't have anything to block it. It's death. He went in that hallway of death. See, and I thought about it because, you know, there's no way I can tell you about how they feel. But I thought about it as a parent. As a parent with kids there, if I knew that while my kid was in that classroom, somebody was going up that hallway, risking death to try to get to him. I'd appreciate it. I would. I mean, they're not perfect, but the person who did it, the monster, is dead. But he went up. A lot of people there didn't. A lot of people didn't enter that building until it was the room was surrounded on all sides by officers with rifles. Not one person on the side that he went in had one. Not one person had an AR. Not one person had a rifle. And they went in. Donald Page went in. Coronado went in. Chief Arredondo went in. People all went in and risked certain death. And the only time that he could have even been close to being in the presence of the shooter is when the shooter shot at him and Page through the wall. And you heard that testimony that there's gunshots going through the wall that they have to back up because not only can they not get to the door at all, they cannot get to the door. Joe Vasquez told you, that door, you're going to die at the door. You will die at the door. And I know that what the prosecution's saying is you should. Your job is to die at the door. But there was a lot of people out there. And if that's the training, die at the door, then everybody out there didn't follow it. Everybody out there waited until there was shield. Everybody out there, Joe Vasquez included. Everybody. And you remember what Joe said. He said, thought his daughter could be in there, and he still waits 50 minutes for shields, for a plan, for BORTAC. So that's what I'm saying. They're twisting it around, and they're saying, well, his job, every shot was noticed that Adrian had to go in and be the person to die at the door, to be the person that tried to breach, solo entry with nothing. But nobody else did that. So is that the training? Right? Like that's one of the things that you have the right to go, because that's count 2, disregarding his training. Is that the training? Because if that is the training, and all these officers have been trained, and not one of them does it, but only one of them sits there, right? Like you have to twist it every time. For every fact has to be twisted around. That no other officer, I'm assuming, they made a point. Everybody's trained an active shooter. But that's why we pointed out that, well, now it's become a barricaded subject. And that training's different than active shooter. Now, some people are treating it like a hostage situation. And that's different than active shooter. And so the point is with this training was never meant to be twisted and used like this. You think that anybody that's putting on police training is going, yeah, and if you don't follow this, you're going to prison? That's not what they're doing. They're trying to give the best possible tactics and strategies to get to the best possible outcome. That's the point. But go back to the duty. If you find right there, honestly, he was never in the shooter's presence. Never was in his presence. Because that law, do not let them argue that law means that he has to go put himself in the presence. That law says it has to be in his presence. That's what that says. And if that's there, and you say that wasn't in his presence, then it doesn't apply. Under 605, he has a duty to prevent the threat, to do injury, if within his power. So they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that it's within his power. Because what they're not talking about is, no, this is saying you have the duty to go and follow the gunfire. That's not what this says. It doesn't say you have a duty to follow the gunfire. What it says is if it's within his power. So all of the officers before the breach, all the officers that even, and I don't have anything bad to say about Joe Vasquez. That man went in there. He went in there and he was willing to put his life on the line. But going in there like that in that room, it's not a whole lot different than going up that hallway, the first people to go up there, without any protection, without any rifle rated anything, without any fire, without any rifles, without anything. But what that's telling you is that the reason that they waited is because it was within none of their power to get in that room. It was within none of their power to do that. It was not within his power to get in there and stop it, and it was not within any of those other guys until they got the right equipment. And then they went in, and it was within their power. But if they haven't proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Adrian could have done something to prevent, if beyond a reasonable doubt, then that doesn't apply. And then, of course, the education coach says he protects the safety and welfare of people in his jurisdiction. Well, of course. But that's not a duty. I don't even understand why it's there. It's not a duty to say, well, yes, and if you violate it, you go to prison. If you violate it, you're a convicted felon. If you violate it, you're going to be on trial. That's just telling police officers, and especially those who work at schools, that your duty is to do that. Of course it is. That's your job. Of course it is. But what we're talking about is we're talking about a man who is trying to do that. He is not trying to do that. He's not going, I'm not protecting anybody. Oh, uh-oh, shooter. And then drive off the other way. He doesn't drive around the building. He doesn't drive away from the gunfire. He's still trying to figure this out, because we're talking about 1 minute and 48 seconds under their indictment. He keeps saying 3 minutes, but it's 1 minute and 48 seconds. I showed you this in Board Hour. When we talk about beyond a reasonable doubt, possibly, probably, guilt likely, strong belief. If you have a strong belief that he had a duty, it's not guilty. Right there. That's why I'm talking about duty first, because as the prosecutor explained, if there's not a duty, then there's not. And not one of this is to be interpreted as me saying that he doesn't have a duty. We all have a duty to each other. And he's a police officer, and he's going to do what he can. But when we're talking about criminal charges, if you even get to, well, it's likely that he does have that duty. It's likely that it was within his power. It's likely that it was within his presence. I have a strong belief it was in his presence. I have a strong belief that it was within his power. That's not guilty. It's a verdict of not guilty right there. That's the first consideration. But going to the indictment, after hearing gunshots and after being advised of the general location of the shooter, and Nico's going to talk to you a lot more about this, like, it's convenient the way they're twisting it. It's convenient the way they're saying, well, of course, he was advised. She told him, 1, 2, 3, and told him exactly where it was, and she pointed over, she's over here, pointed over there, and he knew. That's how they're presenting it to you. But that's not how we know that that's not how it happened. We know, we have to know, because she is frantic. She is very unclear about a lot of things. And so if you have a reasonable doubt that he was advised of the general location of the shooter, that's not guilty. If you have a reasonable doubt that he had time to respond to the shooter, clicker slow on the uptake. Right, having time to respond to the shooter. If you have a reasonable doubt as to that, it's not guilty. Right, because what we established, even now when he's reading Adrian's statement, shots fired, or she told me where it was, shots fired, I radioed it out. He's compressing time in his interview. We're going to talk about that. He's compressing that time. The way he's telling it, she tells him, da-da-da, and then he communicates it on the radio. We know that that's not what happened. We know that from the time of shots fired to the time he communicates it on the radio is a longer period of time, which is accounted for by the fact that he is trying to get the information out of her. Once he does, he communicates it. Once he communicates it, we told you, it's a second after this monster's already gotten in. That unlocked door, but it's already gotten in that door. When he communicates this out, the guy's already there. So having time to respond. Once he finally figures out what it is, does he have time to respond? And if he does respond, we were showing you, if he does respond over here, he's responding to something that's not even there anymore. He's doing basically what Coronado does, which is go completely away from where they saw him go in and go all the way around the building. So if there's a reasonable doubt as to having time to respond, that's not guilty. Any reasonable doubt as to any of these things, these are all elements that they have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And if there's any reasonable doubt as to any of these things, if there's a reasonable doubt as to Melody Flores and what she said, that doesn't say anything about her. That woman was traumatized. Of course she's going to be confused. Of course she's going to say it's a handgun when it's a rifle. Of course she's going to describe a completely different police car. Of course she's going to do those things because she's traumatized. But the reason we point those things out is they want him to be perfect, but they have to be perfect. They have to convince you perfectly, almost, beyond a reasonable doubt, of their evidence. And that evidence rests on what did Melody Flores say and when did she say it? And they did not prove that. They did not prove it because even when she testified, and Nico's going to go over it, she agreed that she was not just saying clearly, hi, this is what's happening, and this is where it is. She was saying a lot of different things. And it goes back to that chart. Anywhere you are, if you're suspected, if he's possibly guilty, if he's probably guilty. I told you at Bordire, I mean, you know, most people get convicted at that probably. Because jurors go, well, he's probably guilty, so they convict him. But that's not what the standard is. That's not what the law says. The law says it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the only way that our Constitution works. It's the only way our system of justice works. Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about Ranger Hill. Look at this. I froze it on his animation that he did. Right at the point that Adrian's passing that spot. And that's where he has the shooter. He says it's approximate. Well, guess what? Approximate's not beyond a reasonable doubt. Their whole case is based on approximate guesses, speculation. We don't know. We're just really mad and we're upset that we have to put somebody here. Somebody's got to go in that chair. Because the guy who actually did this thing, the monster who did this, cannot go in that chair. He's dead. And good riddance. Good riddance. The devastation and the destruction he causes, unlike almost anything that has happened to us as a country, as a people, and definitely in the state of Texas. The devastation that he caused. Children that young and that many. Good riddance. But that's not him. But they have to have somebody. So what do? They give you an animation that looks like that. Which, as we know, we had to bring a witness. We had to bring Claudia to tell you and to show you. Look, you'll see him. He's walking right there. And you see him walking in between those cars, and he stays there. Now, in a few seconds, you're going to see Adrian's car drive by. His head kind of popped down when it happens. He's going right there. You see the white car is flashing right through. That's Adrian driving by him between the cars. So what would an honest rendition of what you just saw, what Claudia testified, what does an honest rendition of that look like? It looks like that. That's what that animation should have looked like. Because we have actual proof. And Ranger Hill can't act like he didn't know that existed. He told you about the puff of smoke. That's the same video he's looking at. He knows that this guy's between the cars. But he told y'all, they sponsored it, that he was here. Why are they doing that? Because they're willing to twist things. They're willing to twist things for you guys in order for you to do their bidding. But those kids aren't honored by an injustice in their name. They're not. It's not honored by a conviction in their name.
First the window going down under 111. Melanie Flores is still urging Adrian Gonzales to go in. She sees the shot come through the window. Adrian Gonzales tells the police that she's the shot went through the window. Adrian Gonzales gets on the radio and says, guys, I think he's made it in the building.
See, that's what they told you at the beginning. They told you that Adrian Gonzales got on the radio and said, guys, I think he's made it in the building. Why are they telling you that? Because they want you to believe that he had that knowledge early, that he knew that he was in the building. What else did he say? In the opening statement to you, that Melody Flores saw the gunshot go through the window. When she testified, she said, I didn't see that. Why is it important? It's because Coronado, we've talked about it, and I feel like it keeps going into a memory hole every time it goes back over here. Right here, Coronado says, guys, I think he made it in the building. He established that. He said, he's the guy on the radio. He's the guy that thinks. Even Ranger Hill said, Coronado is the one who said that. Why did he say that? Because these three saw him do it. Because these three had line of sight. And he's radioing that around. And one thing we were clear to point out is that a gunshot did go off at the exact same time as that transmission. Why is that important? Because we don't know who heard that or who didn't. We don't know who heard Coronado go out and say that he's in the building. But we know that Coronado knew that or said that. And so that's the knowledge he has when he's driving around. Why is that important? Because prosecution, what have they tried to make you think? Coronado knew immediately that the gunshot fire was coming from the building. Coronado knew immediately that. Look at Coronado. He knew it immediately. Of course he did. He saw him move the building on the side. He knew it from here. Once he came around here.
That's not admitted into evidence. There's no evidence that Coronado saw the shooter. There's no testimony of that or anything like that. So now he's misstating facts to the jury.
Okay, once again, ladies and gentlemen, what the lawyers say is not evidence. If the evidence, based upon your recollection, differs, rely on your own. You may proceed.
Well, and I can understand why they're trying to fight against that, because look, this is, what I'm saying is we know that he radioed. I think he's in the building. When he's on this side of the building going to the other side, we know why. He testified. I thought he was going through the building, which implies that he knows that he went in to the building. But they keep fighting against that because this, knowing that he's gone into the building on this side, all their training, what does it say? Go to the gunfire. Even Ranger Hill they're twisting everything. They're twisting it all around. Ranger Hill said, well, yes, going to the gunfire is going all the way around here to the other side of the building, from where you saw him enter and from where you heard and saw him shooting into the building. So that to them is going to the gunfire. That to them is following their training, exactly how they're supposed to. That to them is working to distract, delay, all the things they've charged him with. Well, they're not charged because they did that, even though they watched this happen. Had to have. And then Mike Whitskill. Now, I thought this was interesting. Mike Whitskill, I mean, he's an interesting guy. He said, I'm here as an expert witness in training, right? He didn't have any opinion. This is the interesting thing. The state had every opportunity to have Mike Whitskill go, I trained this guy. And I've seen all this stuff that you've given. And I reviewed all of these things. And Adrian Gonzales did not follow the training that I have. They had every opportunity to do that, and they didn't. They didn't ask him. He said, I didn't review anything. I don't have any opinion about whether or not Adrian Gonzales followed his training. In fact, you don't have any opinion at all. You don't have any real statement from anybody about whether or not he followed his training. And the things that you have from the officers are always with a caveat. Yes, you run to the gunfire if you know where it's coming from. If you don't know where it's coming from, you take cover and assess until you know where it is coming from. That's the first thing. You run towards the gunfire if you know where it's coming from. You look at their active shooter trainings. All the active shooter trainings involve them seeing the shooter and then going after the shooter, which makes sense. But they are prosecuting a person that they will have to admit, and they have admitted, and they've stipulated and never contested that Adrian never saw the shooter. I mean, he talked about the death by PowerPoint. In Adrian's 40-hour class that they were talking about, the 40-hour class he took, he said, look, we do 75-25, the practical versus the death by PowerPoint. I'll point out that, and you'll see that in the training that the prosecution mentioned about, well, Adrian taught a training. He facilitated a training. He did. There was somebody else who wrote the materials. There was somebody else who did it. And that's really what they kind of do. They have to facilitate for each other so that they can get their training hours. But in these trainings that are happening, in the trainings that are going on, all of the trainings are training them to come in, have a rifle, come in, go in and be prepared to come in and do those things, and mainly to come in and see the shooter. Mainly to come in and know where the shots and the shooter is happening. And what they have done is they have just said, well, we don't care. Yeah, he said he didn't know where the shooter was. We don't believe him. We believe everybody else. Everybody else gets a pass. Everybody else. Randy Hill gets a pass. Saucedo gets a pass. Well, yeah. Saucedo said, I think I see him, permission to shoot. Well, we don't believe he said that. Or if he did say that, he had kids behind him, so he shouldn't shoot. That's crazy. That's crazy. Talking about this backdrop, that's crazy. And if that's the case, these officers are being overtrained on backdrop, because you do not fail to shoot a mass murderer of children because there's a backdrop where you could potentially shoot a child. You don't do that. You have to take that shot. And so if that's what they're saying, well, no, Saucedo has a reason why, because there's this backdrop. But then we pointed out, well, if Adrian did what they were asking him to do and came around here, we know now that by the time he transmitted, the guy's in the school, so he would have come around and nobody'd be there. Thank you. But even if he came around and somebody was there, shooting back here that's his backdrop too. But nope, not for him. No excuse we make for every other person there applies to him. And I think that there's something fundamental in each one of us. I think it's fundamental in each one of you that that's not fair. I think it's fundamental that that's not how justice is supposed to be done. It's not. It is not fair. It's not how justice is done, that they can do that and interpret every fact against him, but for everybody else, similarly situated or better situated. He agrees it takes 10,000 hours of practice to reach expertise. I mean, these are not experts. Adrian is not a SWAT expert. He is not an active shooter expert, right? He is doing the best he can, and this was obviously the worst situation of his or any of their law enforcement lives. 5 minutes to dress like one, 5 years to be one. I mean, the training is so extensive, and it's much, much more than Mike Whitskill gave 40 hours on that day. And then they talk about, well, you stop the killing, stop the dying. They never tell you how in these trainings. They never say how. They never say how do you do it if it's just you and a gun, and they have a rifle and you're in an open field. They don't say how. They just say do it. Go in, win the game. Now, this is what in his instructor course, CME does not endorse nor encourage going it alone. See, what I'm saying is that these are sending mixed messages to the people who are being trained. They're reading this. They're seeing it. And then when you're talking about beyond a reasonable doubt on count 2, did he follow his training? It's like, even in the training, they're telling you, well, you should go in, but we don't endorse, we don't encourage it. Because having greater numbers significantly improves a first responder's odds for success. Now, what does that mean, odds for success? Because what they keep saying is that there's a continuum of life scale, and there's a priority of life scale, right? And then proof success. This is not saying odds for success meaning odds that I stay alive as an officer. Odds for success in being able to protect civilians. Odds for success in being able to actually do this. Because if you try to just run in and you don't have any of that, that shooter, remember the shield comes in when they finally came in, pop, 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 he's putting it right on the shield. The guy in the back of the stick, he comes in, shot in the head. That guy was ready. And anybody who approached that door was dead at the door. They were dead at that door. So what they're saying is the numbers improve the first responders' odds for success in saving lives, because a dead police officer is protecting no one. And that's what his training says. That's the person they brought you to say what his training was. That's what the training says. So they're sending mixed messages to these officers, and then if you better read the mixed message the right way, or the way they want you to read it, otherwise you're in this chair. It's not right. We saw the training pictures. This is how they're training to respond to active shooter. You got two people, you got rifles, they're coming in together, they're coming in different ways. That's how they're training. But that's not how it was. And we said in those hundreds of pictures, they didn't bring you one picture where they're coming in with all they got is a gun. All they got is a handgun. Not one in the hundreds that they took at that training. Because they're training these officers to have the right equipment. Adrian didn't, because the school district didn't buy it. Bailouts, we talked about it. Why is it important? Because everybody is responding strangely to this thing because of this wreck. They all think, they're going, well, it's okay that Coronado and them thought, well, this guy's running through the school because it's a bailout, he's just trying to get away from us. But it's not okay that Adrian thought that that could happen. It's not okay if Adrian's standing here going, well, these guys are here and I'm here, and I don't know where these shots are coming from, but he's probably trying to go here. I still have a whole school down here. But it's not okay if Adrian thought bailout, no, he didn't follow his training. What Adrian said, he cooperated every time. Remember, this is a day later, and you know he's experiencing time compression. You know he's doing that because he's saying, I hear the shots, she's telling me I radio it out. That's not how it happened. So he's going through the same problems that we've talked about in all the other witnesses having to recount and recall what happened. He's having that same issue. He drove to the danger, and Nick will talk more about it. And then hindsight bias. And here's the thing that they keep trying to get him on. They go, because hindsight bias for Adrian is, when he's telling the story about what happened, he says, yes, it was a female, it was a coach. Because he now knows that that's the truth. At the time, though, he did not know that. At the time, he didn't think it was a woman. He thought it was the shooter at the time. But when he's telling the story, he's now telling it in a way, using the knowledge that he has, and he's explaining the story. And the same thing goes for when he's talking about what Melody Flores told him. When he's talking about what he understood, he did eventually understand what she was communicating and communicated it out. But in hindsight bias, he's not going through with the ranger, and the ranger's not asking. Was she clear about it? Do we know beyond, did you know beyond a reasonable doubt when you got out of the car that she said that he's over there and you knew exactly where it was? He didn't follow up with any of that. So what Adrian's doing at the time of interview is he's skipping all that stuff. And he's getting to, I figured out what she was trying to say, and I communicated it out on the radio. He skipped it all because nobody's asking him. Because when they interviewed him, they're not prosecuting him. They don't think he did anything wrong. Nobody does. Nobody does. Until years later, after all of this, they had somebody's got to go in that chair. So ultimately, it's the same thing I said from the beginning. You know, I told my kid, and so I'm here, I'm helping this man. But I can't be the only one, and Nico can't be the only one, and Gary can't be the only one. He needs your help too. Y'all are all citizens, and he needs you. He needs you to look at these facts as you have. And y'all have been very attentive, and y'all have had to see very horrible things and hear horrible things. A lot of those things didn't have anything to do with those 3 minutes. Why did they bring it? You know why they brought it. You know why they tried to do it. The horror can make you so angry with him that you convict him. They played on your emotions. They presented all that in front of them. They're trying to do all of that, but they're not really going to what Adrian was experiencing and thinking and feeling on that day. But the one thing you do know, he went up that hallway. The one thing you do know, he went after somebody he thought was the gunman. That man didn't just stand by. He acted, except they just ignore all of his actions because they're trying to pretzel it, massage it, get it in there, do anything that they can to get the conviction. It's the most horrible thing, one of the most horrible things ever. One of the most horrible things that's ever happened in this state. But those kids are not served. The memory of those children, that I agree should be honored, is not honored by an injustice in their name. It's not. And so we're asking you to find him not guilty.